Our speaker today is Julia Webster. Julia has over 15 years of experience managing teams at Turner Broadcasting and F5 Networks. She's passionate about helping other managers improve their managing skills and effectiveness. Today she will be talking about metrics. Metrics can be effective when used properly. They can also cause the opposite behavior of what you want if used improperly. So today she will share with us of how to do it the right way. And also, at the end of the presentation, please remember to use the app to fill out a survey for this topic.
Hi, thanks. I'm Julia Webster. Thanks for coming. It's great to see a full room. And I really do encourage people to fill out the feedback. At the end of my talk, I always look at that and I always take that information to help me do my next talk even better. So I really would appreciate that if you have anything to share. So what was your name? Sorry. As John said, I'm here to talk to you about metrics today. And my name is Julia Webster, and my topic is how to avoid running with sharp metrics. But before I get into that, just a tiny bit about myself. I'm going to ask you some questions today, so I figure if I'm going to ask you questions, you should get to know a little bit about me. So I work at LeanKit, and LeanKit is a visual work management software. Think Kanban boards and lean methodologies. And I am an improvement coach and recently added on the responsibilities of manager again of the customer education team. I had been away from management for about a year, but before that, I was a manager at F5 Networks for about 3 years in the IT department up in Seattle. And I did that for about 3 years, and before that I was over in Atlanta at Turner Broadcasting System, most notably after working as a web developer for CNN and other related properties. I managed the NBA.com web development team. So as you can imagine, in that 16 years of being in web development and being a manager, I had to deal with metrics, right? I had to be measured by them. I had to measure things by them, report them to my superiors, and otherwise give information and make decisions based on them. So that's a little bit about me. And so let's jump in and talk about why do we gather metrics. Anyone want to share a thought that they have about why we might gather a metric? I like to be interactive. Yes?
Can share beautiful, pretty pictures with management.
That wasn't on my list, but that's great. He said to share beautiful, pretty pictures with management. A good manager likes a good chart. That's true. The higher you go up, the prettier the picture needs to be, right? Yes, Paul? To avoid equivocation. Okay, to try and draw a line in the sand. Those are great reasons. A few others are to discover new information, right? If you look at something, you might learn something that you didn't know before. To answer open questions, say you have a problem, you need to do some discovery to figure out why you have that problem and what you can learn to help solve it. Or to just assess your effectiveness. One of the things that I heard the most is how can we get measures to tell if our team is successful, right? Then that's what does success mean? How do you measure success the same way over multiple teams? It gets really, really tricky. But regardless of why you measure things, there are generally 3 types of business analytics that you see out in the world. And the first we are most comfortable with, this is what most of our analytics fall into, and that's the descriptive analytic. And that tells us what's happened, and maybe, if we're lucky, we find out why it happened. These are things like reports of incidents, reports of changes that have happened, bug reports, etc., deploys. But again, it's all about the history. So we're really comfortable with that. That's what we've had the most experience with. But the next one is predictive analytics, and this is where we see people trying to dip their toes into the water, not only looking at the descriptive analytics of what has happened, but building on that to maybe figure out what might happen. There's a simulation that I like to recommend to people who are trying to figure out when something might be able to be delivered. And with a little information, you can use something like a Monte Carlo simulation to come up with a range of possibilities, which is often better and more accurate than even an expert's estimate, right? So that's getting into the area of predictive analytics taking information from the descriptive nature of the past to generate options that might happen in the future. So again, we're barely putting our toes into there, but what we really want to get to is the land of prescriptive analytics. So if you haven't noticed, these build on each other. Predictive builds on descriptive, and prescriptive builds off of predictive as well. So we have to know what all of those options are, the things that might happen, but we want to go one step further and help guide us towards the one that we think should happen, the one we want to happen. So a lot of times, there are not many places that I've seen do this effectively, if any. Maybe you guys have had some examples, and I think you're lucky if that's the case. More often than not, I see this as a more manual process where we have a lot of descriptive information, maybe some predictive analytics, and then a coach or an expert who's trying to guide you with manual decisions towards a particular outcome. But there are examples in the shopping industry, for instance, if you go to Amazon and you buy something. And then they have this process, this automated script that says, hey, you bought that thing. Other people that bought that thing bought this other thing too, so now I want you to buy that. So I'm going to tell you, hey, buy this and this together and, for this price. And it's trying to lead you down a path to get more sales, the thing that they want to happen. So that's a real life example of using prescriptive analytics to get a new outcome. And it doesn't matter what type of analytic you use, what you measure shows what you value. So if I'm a manager and I put something up on the wall, that's going to be a signal to my team. They're going to say, hey, that's an important thing. It's up on the wall. She spent time gathering it. And if I spent time gathering it and I think it's important, and they look at me as some kind of representative of where our company needs to go, then they might think, I need to make that metric good. So when you decide to optimize a metric or optimize towards a metric, you make decisions. But not all of those decisions may be in the company's best interest. So we're going to talk about that a little today. And we want to find out if we're running with these sharp metrics. And what that basically means is doing more harm than good, we want to use metrics for good and not evil. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And the way we're going to do that is to first talk about some common metrics mistakes that I've seen out in the wild, you've probably experienced. The first time I did this talk was with a data scientist who's also a lean coach, and so this was very interesting, and so he's seen a lot of these things too. Then we're going to talk about making metrics safe, because it's fun to tell you all the bad things, but you want utility. You want to know what to do instead, right? And then I'm going to give you an example from the field, things that I used to report on in my quarterly business reviews at F5. So the first metric mistake that I want to share is what I call diagnosing with metrics before defining your goal. And what this means is you're just out there gathering all the things, but you don't really know why. And you might occasionally stumble upon success or improvement by that, but it's not an intentional, purposeful thing. An allegory that I like to use is an example of a doctor's appointment. When I walk into a doctor's appointment, the first thing I do is talk to a nurse, right? She wants to know why I'm there. They might take some baseline metrics like my blood pressure or my temperature, but they don't jump right into diagnosis, right? They don't jump right into giving me all the tests in the world before they know why I'm there. So they first do a discovery or identification of your problems and your goals, what brought you to the office. Then they decide what to measure to see how they can help you. And then finally, after they do that, experiments are selected in the form of more tests or medicine, and then hopefully you see an improvement in your condition. So I've never seen that first step skipped at the doctor's office, but I have seen that first step skipped in many, many organizations. And it doesn't really make any sense at the doctor, and it doesn't make any sense at work. So we want to try to remember that there's a necessary order of operations when we're trying to solve problems with metrics. Sorry. First, we want to define those goals. Then it's time to gather metrics, and we'll dig into that a little bit more in a minute. And then once we have our metrics, we can develop some strategy. So that's diagnosing before we really even know why we're gathering our metrics. Now, another thing that we can do to hurt ourselves is to give ourselves the wrong impression by putting too much stock in vanity metrics. Has anybody ever heard of vanity metrics? Who wants to give me their thought on what that is? John?
Metrics that don't measure directly what you're trying to control or learn about, but
Yeah.
are there more to make you feel better.
Right, and what John said, because I know it's hard to hear in the back, is metrics that don't measure directly what you're trying to accomplish, but they make you feel good, right? So we see this a lot out in marketing with number of likes and all these things that make them feel like they're doing a great job, but don't really translate to conversions. We see this a lot in tech. Even the State of DevOps report from Puppet Labs for 2015, or maybe even 16, says that number of deployments a day, frequency of deployments, is a factor that represents high-performing teams. And that may well be the case, but on the face of it, it's a vanity metric, right? I could deploy 4,000 times a day, but it doesn't tell me that I'm delivering value to my customers. So anything that doesn't tie directly to it, I like to call them number of metrics or activity metrics, are things that we need to be careful with. We need to understand what they really tell us. Because it's not that these things are evil, it's that we're using them wrong. They're telling us one thing. They're saying, I sure do get a lot done, right? But we're saying, oh, I add so much value. That's what that metric is telling me. So we're the ones that give it the wrong purpose. A lot of times they can still be useful, but they need to be used in conjunction with other things. So a lot of times, in an operations team, 5 nines is the holy grail. It's hardly ever achievable, but it's the holy grail. And so they could kill themselves trying to get 5 nines. That's important. You need to market that, I guess. But what's more important is to understand the impact of the outages they have. So combining the downtime, total downtime, with an understanding of the impact to the customers so you can make good decisions about what to fix when you need to approach decision making is important. Instead of deploys in a day alone, measure that along with trends of value delivered to your customers. So essentially, we don't want to confuse activity with progress. That's one of the key things that I remember from all the training I've ever had at work. This guy, he was an Agile coach. We called him Scrum Bob. This is what he told us. Don't confuse activity with progress. And that stuck with me. Now, a really insidious mistake we can make with metrics is thinking that shame is going to produce desired behaviors. They definitely produce behaviors, but they're not always the ones that we desire. So I'm going to give you a scenario, and then I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. The scenario is that your name is on a dashboard of engineers that have, 5 or more bugs assigned to you. And that dashboard is out in the hallway near the executive's offices. Okay? What do you think the first time you see your name on that list? Anyone? Just holler it out. Yeah, oh crap, right? Right, yeah, you're not thinking, boy, they're seeing my name on that list because I'm doing so many other important things, right? They're seeing that this is a huge naughty list that my name is now on, and now I have to make a choice. So is there a plausible reason other than incompetence that my name might be on that dashboard? Can somebody give me one? Sorry?
You're the default value.
I'm the default. That's a great answer, especially from a quality conference. I should have seen that one coming. Yeah. Someone over here.
I'm just so good that I have so many bugs assigned and I take care of all of them.
There you go. He said, I'm so good that I have so many bugs assigned, I take care of all of them. So the one that I keep going to is because I'm working on something that's a higher priority. So I have had to let these bugs accumulate so I can work on the priority for my company that they've said is the high priority item. It's more important than this. But yet my name is on this dashboard, and now I'm faced with a conundrum, right? I have to make a decision. And a lot of times we make decisions that are forced on us by systems, and we're punished for those decisions. Now, there are ways that we can measure and try to eliminate bugs besides the naughty list. And that naughty list is going to make me do one of two things. I'm going to say, okay, I realize that I need to work for the good of the company, so I'm going to keep working on this other important thing and leave my name on that naughty list, even though these executives are going to think I'm horrible. Would you guys do that? I don't think I would, right? So I'm choosing to hurt the company to make myself look better. This is why people get punished for bad systems. So we need to be understanding of the metrics that we put up and what consequences can arise from displaying that. We're going to talk about sort of a risk-reward ratio for metrics in just a little bit. But before that, another mistake that we can make is lacking awareness of the wider picture. There's this really great book series. The first one is called Zoom, and the second one is Resume, and I got it in a management training class one day, a long time ago. And it really helps illustrate the situation. So I'm going to show you a series of pictures. And when I look at these pictures, I'm going to put myself in the role of operations manager. I'm managing the situation on the ground of what this picture is showing me. So when I look at this first picture, I see this sort of exotic-looking man somewhere in a forest, and it looks like they're filming a TV show in the back. I'm starting to get some idea of what I might be responsible for, things I might need to make a decision about by looking at this picture, but I'm going to take one step back and before I make decisions. And I see, okay, it is a guy. He's on an elephant. There's this woman, exotic-looking woman, helping us drive the elephant, and this Western businessman on that. So as the operations manager, I'm going to say, okay, safety. I have to control safety. They don't need to fall off this elephant, right? Cultural situations. Do they understand how to talk to each other so everyone will be happy at the end of the elephant ride? Do they know where they're going? Are they going to get there okay? Okay. So now I have this job. I'm looking at this information, and I'm making decisions about what I'm going to do based off what I see. But if I take another step back and I look at it from a different angle or different context, I see, hey, that's just a picture on a box, right? Now I'm going to make the same decisions about what I'm going to do based on this new information. It's not just a box. It's a box on a boat that's a toy boat that kids play with. So what I really want to get the point across for this is that a lot of times we under or overinflate the importance of the information right in front of us, and we don't stop and step back and look at the context to help make sure we're making the right decisions. So we might make different decisions if we took that time to step back and understand how the other viewpoints affect what we're looking at. So if we're looking at our team-based metrics, we could optimize things that benefit our team, but at the cost of the people around us. And so that's really not a great thing for us to do. The final mistake that I want to talk about is treating metrics like targets. This is what W. Edwards Deming would call managing by numbers. And when we manage by numbers, it's usually not the exact number that's actually our goal, right? It's something that will help us achieve a better state, but we forget that the goal that we have isn't exactly the number. So I'm going to give you an example, because that's a little convoluted. You might set a target to get an application to 95% test coverage, code coverage. And if you're at 5, 10, 20, 30%, that 95% target puts you in a really good direction. It tells you you need to be significantly better than you are. And there is a point where you can stop. You don't have to get to 100%. So that's a really great thing to help you move along. But when we get to 90, 92, 93%, 94, is there really a significant difference between 94 and 95? At that point, we need to understand the cost of doing the things that will help us get that next 1 or 2%. And we need to make sure that it's really worth the things that we have to do. And the answer isn't always yes. So it's a question that we have to look at based on our own circumstances. And the issue is that sometimes we elevate that target over any other sane decision that we might have to make. And it's like these people saying the goal is 95% no matter what, even if I have to kill everything to get to it. And that's exactly what Deming, some people call him the father of quality, W. Edward Deming said, if you give a manager a target, he's going to meet it, even if he has to destroy the organization to do so. So we really need to be careful when we give targets and we stick to a particular number. We have to understand that the number is a tool and not a goal to get to the thing that we need to get to. So that's a little bit about things that we can do wrong. That's probably enough about things that we can do wrong. How can we do it right? How can we make metrics safe? So the corollary to the first mistake is knowing your goal, right? Again, we can stumble across progress without a goal, but it's not very intentional. We want to make sure that the goal we have is what we really want to achieve. And what I mean by that is, as a manager, I've dealt with lots of goals, yearly goals, people writing their own goals. And one thing that I would see a lot is, I want to take training classes this year, right? And I can take 2 training classes, and my measure of success will be that I've done them. Well, that is a goal, but it's not a very good one, right? The goal of taking training classes is usually to learn something to get a better value from that learning. So we want to do the same thing with our goals here for our metrics. So not only do you need to know your goal, but you need to understand why you want to achieve it and make sure that you're going deep enough to really understand the thing that you actually are striving for. Once you have a goal, you can use this technique from Victor Basili called GQM. If you don't have a place to start, this is a very good framework for developing a metrics inventory or program. And GQM stands for Goal, Questions, Metrics. So essentially it's a 3-tiered framework. You start out with your goal, what you want to do, and in this example, is decide when the software is suitable to be shipped. Then you think, okay, what are the questions that, if answered, will tell me if I'm meeting my goal? And in this example again, it's what's the stability requirement? What's the current reliability? And what are the timescales? And only once I understand how I'll know if my goal has been met, can then I look to see what metrics that I can gather to help me along that path. So you decide the goal, you ask the questions, and then you figure out what information you can gather that can answer those questions. If you're a manager, I'd say that it's probably your responsibility to make sure that the end goal is always kept in sight, working with the people that have the most knowledge of the system to understand the questions that we need to ask and the metrics that can make the most sense to monitor to answer those questions. We're often tempted as managers to make those decisions ourselves. We think it's our responsibility. But more often than not, the longer we're a manager, the farther we are away from the information to actually answer those questions. So involve your team, even better make it a group activity, and everyone can understand what goes into building a metrics inventory. Once you do that, this next step should be sort of just a pass through because you've done all that. This will probably, be a pass. But you subject each metric to the so what test. And what that means is you ask these 2 questions and hope that the answer to one of them is yes. And that's, does it matter to my customer? Would they care if this metric was positive or negative, right? Or will it help me make a decision or take action? If it doesn't pass one of those 2 questions, then you probably don't need to measure it. The next thing that we want to do to make sure that we have a safe environment with our metrics is to understand how each one can be gamed. Now, this can be a lot of fun. I don't know about you, but the developers that I've worked with, and if you're testers here, it's your job to find the dark, dirty underside of things a lot of times. So we're good with cynicism and finding the problems. So this is something that you can involve your team to do. Each metric that we gather obviously has merit. We think it has merit or we wouldn't want to gather it. But we need to understand that there's this side where people can game it by trying to optimize that metric, maybe with some decisions that don't help us in the end, like we talked about earlier. That's what I call the risk-reward ratio, and every metric has one. We need to understand what those numbers are, make sure it's right side up. If it's not, we need to get rid of it and use something else that doesn't have too high of a risk for the value that we get for the metric. Again, we want to involve our team, just like in building the portfolio. We can sit there and we can think of ways that we might game it, but I can guarantee you that if you sit down and make this a fun exercise with your team and pull out the metrics you all decided on and said, hey, let's figure out how we could screw this up. This would be a really fun exercise to do. So asking your team to participate in this, to find out how you can game it, what would the impact be of that, and is the reward worth the risk? You'll come up with a world of ideas that will be much more plentiful than the ones that you could think of on your own. And again, the goal is to see if the reward-risk ratio is positive or negative so that you can make good decisions about your portfolio. One thing we forget, too, is that metrics can have expiration dates, right? We've talked about deciding what metrics to use based on our goals. Goals change over time, right? So if our goals change, it stands to reasons that our metrics should change as well. If we're measuring something like deployment frequency, one of the reasons why the DevOps report says that that is an indication of a high-performing team if you're deploying a lot is because they realize that an issue is that most people have really crappy deployment pipelines, right? And it's super hard to deploy things. It takes hours or days to get things out. So people who have optimized that, who can deploy a lot, are likely to have better processes. It's that vanity metric again, but it does tell you something. But if we've gotten to the point where we've fixed that pipeline problem, we're deploying very, very easily now, but we're still really pushing how many things we can deploy a day, that starts becoming a higher risk than the reward it used to provide us when we actually had a problem to fix. So with that goal being gone, it's time to look at what else we can measure and discard the things that helped us solve our previous problems. Because hanging on to metrics past their expiration date can encourage gaming and cause those unintended consequences that we want to get rid of. So those are all things about how to validate individual metrics and how to come up with an overall metrics portfolio. But one thing that I really want to ask that you consider when you're building that metrics portfolio is to think about balance. And I like quirky analogies, so the one that pops into my head about this is a wobbly restaurant table, right? Does anybody like sitting at one of those? Every time you move, it just throws everything off balance. Our customers don't like when our businesses are unbalanced and wobbly, when you're really fast but you have really bad quality, right? So it's really the same way. Put yourself in their shoes. So the danger is if all of our metrics are in one bucket towards one area of keeping our company healthy, we can be making that better and better and better and not really understanding the impact that it has on the other parts of our organization and the balance that we could create. So Larry Maccheroni, who's a data scientist, he used to be with Rally, came up with this balance quadrant. And again, it's a good framework to use. You can use it just as it is if you'd like, or you can come up with your own quadrants. But the idea is to understand the different aspects your company needs to be balanced and healthy. And what he uses in his example is do it fast. Are we keeping pace with the business? Do it right. Are people happy with our work? Do we have good quality? Do it on time when we promise. Do we deliver? Are we predictable? And then keep doing it, right? It's easy to do one of those, but we have to do them all three at the same time, and then we have to do it over and over and over again. And that takes skill all on its own. One thing about balance is if we're really, really good in one area, we might need to make a trade-off of some of that extra good to fix a deficit in another area, and that's okay. Sometimes it's okay to sacrifice a little speed to get a little better quality, or sacrifice speed to get a little bit more predictability. That's okay, because what we're building is a healthier, balanced business. So an example that I took from my F5 days as a manager, every quarter we had to do a quarterly business review. And we had to give some pretty stock information. Every quarter, every team did the same ones. And then we could add some of our own. And I didn't know about this balanced quadrant at that time, so I retrofitted it in to see how well we did. It actually, fortunately, worked out pretty well. So I used the same, do it fast, do it right, do it on time, and keep doing it. And here's how that broke down. So do it fast. We did open versus closed trends of the number of items that we did. And we did that quarter over quarter. And as well as cycle time trends. How long did it take from when we started work to when we completed work? Cycle time is one of my sort of baseline, like blood pressure or, temperature. I always do cycle time. So that let us know, are we keeping pace with our business? Do it right. One of the things, my team had 8 people and 60 apps. Now, some of them were super tiny and some of them were major. So we had to know where to focus. So one of the things that we did was incident by application. Every quarter we'd look and see which applications had the most problems, and we'd look at that quarter over quarter to see some trends. Not only that, we would do customer satisfaction. And you can measure that in a lot of ways. One way is, a lot of times there's surveys on, incidents. If you close them, they get a survey, and those are hardly ever filled out. But one of the things that we did also was we took a survey, a more aggressive survey of our main stakeholders every couple of weeks on a cadence. We checked with them to see how they thought we were doing, the things that we were doing well. We didn't just leave it to those post-incident surveys. Do it on time. We did have SLAs for tickets and incidents. We were using a little bit of ITSM. And so we did the number of SLA breaches for the quarter and trend, and then also just ongoing project progress, because we had lots of different types of work. So that was do it fast, do it right, do it on time. And then keep doing it. That was sort of harder to measure. One of the things that we did was quarter over quarter on everything. Trends are much more important than individual data points. You can get lost in the weeds on an individual data point that's really not representative of everything else. So we wanted to look at longer term trends for every measure in all of our quadrants. But the other was team happiness. How likely are we to keep doing the things that we're doing that got us these? And when I talked earlier about executives wanting to know how you measure success, we had a really hard time with that as management team at F5. Everybody felt like they did different work, and story points didn't help. That doesn't matter when you look at team to team. Velocity was different. There wasn't a whole lot that we felt like that we had that could really be sort of measured from team to team. So we looked at customer satisfaction, team satisfaction, and some of these do it fast trends. And if we're doing those things, if we're keeping our customers happy and we're keeping our team happy, then we're doing a really good job somewhere. And all the rest almost, it does matter, but it almost in a way doesn't if you're managing to keep your customers happy and your team happy at the same time. So that's an example of my metrics inventory that I used. But one thing that I really want to put out there is that that's mine, right? It fit my context and my needs. You could take it, but your mileage would vary because you have a particular context, particular problems that I might not have had. And so don't ever feel bad that you don't have a template that you can use, because no template would help you achieve your goal. You have to look at your context and problems and figure out what metrics will help you. So for the takeaways, I just wanted to sum up some of the main points. And the first is, again, to map your metrics to goals using the questions, the GQM report. Please really think about the risk of each metric. They're not always super dramatic, but take some time to figure out the underside of what might happen if you really put importance on a particular metric. Get rid of expired metrics after they've helped you reach your goal so that they don't become risks for you in the future. And then just remember to keep everything in balance. Don't let your focus on speed or any other particular area take out another side of your business without you even knowing it. And then don't use anybody else's prescription. There's no other context that's just like yours. There are a lot of things I mentioned that can sort of be, your baseline stuff that maybe would be beneficial for everyone, but that's just a small set. The rest is what's going to be important to you. And with that, I just wanted to share some information on how to communicate with me. So I've got a blog, everydaykanban.com, and that's my Twitter handle as well. And then I also write for my company's blog, LeanKit.com. And I've got a few blog posts on metrics, specifically vanity metrics. And that's it. I wanted to ask if there's any questions. Yes?
Real examples of risk reward, say for Washington down incidents by accident,
Yeah, let me go back to that. So the risk reward for, yeah. So that one, if I was focusing on, let me think about that. I haven't thought about it in with that particular one in context. But the reason that we gathered incidents by application trends is because we didn't have enough people to focus full time on every application that we had. So knowing that we have to make choices about what to spend time on and what to ignore, we needed to see over time which things were the most needy. And one assumption that we had was that if people were putting in incidents, then that was being used, right? And that people were caring about it. So that was the risk for us. That was the reward for us, sorry. The risk would be that maybe those were all very minor bugs and they weren't super important, but we focused our time on them anyway over smaller numbers of incidents or bugs that had a higher impact. So if we looked at that all on its own without really considering that extra information, we might make decisions that aren't the best in the long run. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
You talk about throwing away expired metrics.
Mm-hmm.
I can see things where you hit your goal, but you want to make sure that you continue to hit your goal.
Yeah.
So what are some strategies that you use to make sure that that's done without making yourself continue to try to get better?
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I've thought about that before. And I think that one thought that's coming into my head is that you can have sort of a primary driving set of metrics that is, really the things that are helping you achieve your current need or goal. But you can move something down to sort of you want to monitor things. I'm considering it monitoring rather than active attention seeking, and I guess that's sort of the way that I think about it. So in the end, maybe you still are measuring a few things, but the things that you're actively focusing on and putting importance on are going to be a smaller subset of things that help you achieve your current needs and goals. Now, not everything that you used to measure you might want to continue monitoring, but some stuff you may. So maybe you do have a bigger set of things that you monitor, but you aren't really promoting out for everyone to realize that you're looking at it until it's a problem. Yes, in the back. Back there. Right. Yeah, so one of the slides that I didn't put in this particular deck is if you can imagine this balance, this quadrant kind of thing with the actual charts and reports in them. Now I wish I had put that in, but so that person that I spoke of, Troy McGinnis, he's a data scientist and lean coach. He actually shows all of his metrics all in context. This may not be yet answering your specific question, but that way when I'm looking at incidents by application trend, I can see if there's a correlating piece in another area that caused that impact. So not only do we want to measure all of these to ensure balance, but remember to look at them as a balance set. And one of the things that he also did to get more towards that predictive level is once he sort of understood the things you might do from the patterns that he would see on this chart, He actually wrote something that would automatically put up coaching advice next to this chart based on the patterns that he saw, and that gets us towards the more prescriptive analytics. For me, I'm not there yet with that, right? It's harder to see the patterns and really predict what, but that's something to aspire to for me, but definitely something I'm seeing people do. Did that answer your question? Okay. There was one. Yes. Yeah. So the question was, have you ever wanted to measure anything that you really weren't properly prepared to measure? You didn't have quite the capability, the hooks to do that. What are some tricks for dealing with that? So there are so many examples of that I can't give you a particular thing that would fix all the problems, but one thing that I will say is that we put too much stock in having perfect data. And there's this book called How to Measure Anything by Douglas Hubbard. And the key takeaway from that is that you need a lot less information than you think to make a big positive impact, especially if you have no information. Even the slightest bit of information can help you make the biggest change. Remember when we were talking about the test code coverage and you could be at 5% and you need to get to 90. Well, every little bit of change you make early on is a huge difference, but when you get to 92, 93, 94, that's, the impact is sort of negligible. The same thing here. So if you have a little bit of information, don't assume that that's not valuable. And it doesn't have to be perfect to get some benefit out of it. I don't remember the whole story, but I really suggest you read the book because there was something like he could determine or deduce the number of piano tuners based on the number of gas stations. I mean, it was crazy, like things you think would never be relevant. He has some really fun examples for how to deduce and get information from what we think is impossible situations. So I would suggest reading that or maybe watching one of his presentations. Yeah. Yes? Yeah. So the question was, if I was using Kanban, was that the driver for doing quarterly, and would there be danger in doing it more often? And fast feedback loops are always awesome, right? One of the things that one of the misunderstandings about Kanban people have is that because there's no iteration, that means there's no cadences. Just because we don't stop the flow to deliver a chunk of work every week or 2 weeks doesn't mean that it's not valuable to do things like retrospect or measure on a cadence. So I would definitely err on the side of more often than less often, because if you can catch something earlier, we don't want to build planes with broken bolts from 5 years ago that we could have caught really, really early, right? So earlier, more often is better, I think, in almost all the cases. You could go overboard and measure every hour or day, and that's probably not helpful. So there's a balance. Yeah. Right. Exactly, and that's perfect because that was our cadence for reporting up. And at their level, they didn't need to know the day-to-day, but for us, we did. So we did measure weekly, daily, whatever our needs required. I think we have time for maybe one more question, if there is one, or comment. Okay, thank you guys so much. I love the conversation after as much as I liked the presentation. So I really appreciate you guys being very interactive and answering my questions and then asking your own afterwards. Don't forget to fill out the feedback and let me know the things that I did well and the things that I can improve for next time. Thanks for coming and have a great conference.